received BS degrees in biology and physical therapy and MS in rehab technology. She has presented on topics of wheelchair evaluation and assistive technology locally at RESNA in 2009 and International Seating Symposium in 2011. She's now going to present. Because of the size of the room, we'd like you to hold your questions till the end, and she'll allow 15 minutes at the end for questions.
Good morning. If anything is not clear or you're not hearing me or anything, let me know. I'm just afraid I may not hear your question from the front. But as introduced, this topic today is on powered mobility for people with minimal physical access. And I know that there have been several, or will be several, conversations that happen or at the conference that will touch on different aspects of it. I'm coming from a school-based therapist perspective. And just to let you know, in terms of our introduction, we're all aware of the fact that those users who have very limited physical access are typically very different from the general population of kids with CP or some of the other diagnoses that we see. And what we have found in our area is that success is most often dependent upon that user having more than one means of access, whether it's for driving, for computer access, or for both. And most likely, the driver controls will need to be integrated with their computer, with their communication device, and with any environmental controls that will give them independence. We all know that a systematic eval is going to be the most important thing. It's going to be what gets us funded. And so we've been pretty successful with the equipment that we've ordered, and that was part of the reason that when I presented this as an idea, as a topic for ISS, they asked if we would include that part. So I did put some handouts out. They may be poorly distributed simply because we weren't sure where people were going to sit. There are charts that will be in the slides, hard copies, and if you would prefer to have an electronic copy, if you email me, I'd be happy to send resources to you electronically. So there are three objectives. One would be looking at least 3 different switch types for unconventional switch use, for people who have at least reliable movement in one switch site and limited physical strength. We'd like to make sure that you are comfortable with being able to provide a rationale for dual or multiple points of access, multiple methods of driving, and then also that you would be comfortable with the physical requirements and potential for eye gaze as a means of driving a wheelchair. So as noted, I've been in the schools for a long time. At one point in time, when I first started in 1980, assistive technology was limited to things like an answering machine with a continuous voicemail answering machine loop through it that said something, if you hit a switch, Jay, I need help. I'm ready to get off the toilet. And wheelchairs were the things we modified. And then a lot of people in the audience have had similar experiences with that. Anyway, NSSED, just in case you are unaware of what co-ops are, we're a conglomerate, a cooperative of multiple school districts. Right now we're 18 districts local to the northern suburbs of Chicago. And our particular district actually started a little before Public Law 94-142 was authorized, just based on the fact that the districts recognized the fact that there were kids in the neighborhoods that needed some kind of an educational process. And we've gone from the center-based school to pretty much full inclusion, and we do have classes that include life skills and early childhood for kids that have higher level of special needs, but the emphasis is always inclusion as much as possible. One of the components that makes that work is that we have a pretty strong assistive technology team. And it's composed of educators, speech pathologists, OT, PT. And over the course of years, we've been able to develop a nice lending library of things so that we can trial stuff. Our students come from those various districts, and they either attend their school at their local home school, or if they're in in a category where they may need more help. They may be not in their own district, but grouped with kids with a little bit more similar needs and in, again, a regular building. So we see children who have, the gamut of disabilities, as anyone in the audience probably, if you work with kids, you probably see all of these diagnoses. And these are kids that we've provided power chairs to over the years. Kids with CP, muscular dystrophy, spinal muscular atrophy, brain tumor, traumatic brain injury. We've had several drownings, unfortunately. Leukodystrophies, which are relatively rare, and for adrenoleukodystrophy, it tends to be fatal and over a very short period of time. Unfortunately, those boys have not benefited from powered mobility, but we have a student with a very unusual leukodystrophy who no one knows how long she'll live, but she's using a power chair right now and manual mobility, and we're looking towards what she's going to need in the future. Rett syndrome, hypotonia, holoproencephaly, agenesis of the corpus callosum, spinal cord injury, and over the last few years, a student with locked-in syndrome after a brainstem aneurysm. Greater than 90% of our kids use some kind of assistive technology if they're power wheelchair users for accessing their academic stuff. So it may be as simple as an accessibility feature on a computer. My little student with leukodystrophy really is able to use everything on the computer. She doesn't need any specialized software right now. She uses it more and more because she fatigues during the day. Kids use a lot of writing software. Just again, like the word prediction on your phone, it just speeds up the process. We use a lot of on-screen keyboards, and our staff is really good at figuring out which ones are going to be most accessible in terms of size and what the features on the keyboard would be. Lots of them, of course, are using text-to-speech. Kurzweil is a very common program because it allows you to take notes, to edit your notes, and to write a note sheet similar to what you would do if you were doing it by hand. Greater than 50% of our students also use some kind of assistive technology, whether it's an AAC device that's dedicated to that purpose, a computer, a tablet. There's something for expressive communication, and we need some way to make sure that we're tying that into what they have. And our districts do, quite a few of our districts have one-to-one initiatives, so they're providing a computer or a tablet to the kids, and then it's our job to figure out, oh, that's a Chromebook, and you need all kinds of speech generation, you need all kinds of software to make this work for you. It may or may not work, so we have to kind of work with what the kids start out with and then make the case if this isn't good enough to meet their needs as to what it is they're going to need. We have a lot of tablets right now. The schools in our area are very big on Mac and Apple, and so we're primarily looking at iPads and the mini iPads. And a lot of kids are also using iPhones most recently. Most systems have some type of alternative control. Very few of our kids are doing a direct select on a keyboard. So we do a lot of mounting. I do a lot of mounting. And I have a couple of different pictures here between a dedicated device, a computer, and an iPad. And then, they often will throw me a complete curveball and say, okay, but can he have that on his standard too? So, sometimes it's a matter of we have to come up with an alternative joystick, and then I have to figure out how I can use the same mount, what kind of a clamping system can put that on their standard so they can use their standard during the course of the day without it just being static time. So it's a fun challenge. We make a lot of splints to hold switches just because some of our users are unable to maintain a switch or maintain their hand in the same place if they're using a switch. Both of these are kids for whom that happens. The little girl who's on the left has it next to her web space, and her hand can be anywhere in space because it frequently is. And this just worked out to be the most effective. And we kind of came on this randomly because when she came to us, her mom said, oh, she's pretty good with her elbow. Well, she's pretty good with her elbow if you hold her arm down, and then she can stay kind of in the same place. So our thought was, well, we could put something on the side of the chair that just sort of limits where her arm could go. But even just holding my notebook next to her, we were seeing a lot of this. So, but we kept seeing this. And so we figured, let's just use that. And the more she worked, the quieter she got, and her hand pretty much came down. But this became an extremely reliable method for her. The person whose picture is on the right has very, very limited movement. And so he's just doing a little bit of a squeeze on a micro light switch. And we needed to stabilize that for him on his hand, because whenever his hand randomly moved with either spasticity or a cough, everything changed in orientation. We do a lot of computer access. The young woman on the left was set up for email on her computer, and we went with a system. She drives with her joystick way out to the side, but she's a good driver. Then we discovered that she needed a switch, and she wasn't able to hit a switch no matter where we put it. So when we came up with the email program for her, we mounted a head switch, and then for their home system, she has a desktop computer, and so she has a wireless mouse. All she has to do is roll up, and she's good to go. So she can now access everything independently, whereas if we went with a wired system or mounted something on her chair, she would be carrying around stuff that she didn't need all the time. The other thing she uses her switch for is to control her. Originally it was her iPad, and now it's her phone for her music. But she speaks, so she did not need an AUGCOM device. And the little boy on the left is sharpening pencils in this picture, but he also does other things on the computer. And I use a lot of Lockline when I'm just looking for a low-tech solution for something. And he is not a power chair candidate, but even for some of my kids in power, I will use Lockline if they need an alternate switch and their head movement or head placement is not necessarily in the same spot every day. I don't want something that's a permanent mount like the Stealth switch that we have on the side, because I want to make sure they're not hitting their glasses. We can put it wherever it is they want it, when they want it. One of the things that I still get to do a lot is build things. And so for those of you who remember the kid cart, that's a kid cart seat on a Power Tiger base for a very little girl who we wanted to try driving, and we figured we'd use a head array to start her out with because she didn't have much in terms of hand function. The little wooden block is on there because they're transit tie-downs, and the seat pan was too deep for me to get the thing on there, and I wanted the little extensions for the legs to go into the receivers for the leg rest holders. So it all, a couple of bolts, it all came together. But it was fun, and she's very effective with this. So we'll move from there. Obviously, we won't get her a kid cart, but anyway, so we try to take an integrated technology approach where we are looking at everything that the kid does during the course of the day. We want to make sure that whatever suggestions that we make, going back to the team, is stuff that they're actually going to be able to use. And then one of the reasons for trialing, of course, is to be able to prove that to the districts or the insurance companies. So we do team assessments. It's generally 3 of us that are involved at a time, sometimes a 4th, but working with the child's educational team, the speech and language pathologists, OT, and me typically. And we'll look at how they're doing in school and what are the expectations for them. If you're a first grader, we're not expecting you to be able to do high school algebra, but on the other hand, we need to work with whatever the curriculum is, and we need to figure out where are the discrepancies and what would make it most functional for this kid to be able to do age-appropriate work, or, if we need to modify the work so that it can work for the child. And then we need to look at what they came with. If they already have some technologies, what are their abilities with it, and what can we do so that we're not going to insurance and asking for something that's not that old and is kind of functional for the kid, but not necessarily doing everything we need. So when we need to do extended trials, we rely on our library of stuff, and then we'll take our data and do an outcome presentation to the team and the family and talk about where we want to go, from there. If we're going to look at power, and this is, the big reason for which I would be involved, we would then talk to a wheelchair supplier. If a child comes to school at age 3 and they're in a stroller, we may be fine with that for the current time, but looking ahead, if we're looking at, particularly if we're looking at power, we're going to have to try to figure out, are they going to need a manual wheelchair soon? Is that the first step? And maybe we'll run an extended trial with power using one of the chairs that we have so that they get their manual base, and then a year or so down the road, we might be able to get them in a power chair as well. We look at what their funding is. We do a lot of Medicaid funding, even though I'm in a fairly wealthy area and a lot of children have private insurance. All of our AUGCOM devices and computers, any switches or mounts get paid for through our district in the state of Illinois. And then, we need to figure out what we're going to do in terms of all of our documentation, ordering, delivery, follow through. And that's one of the really nice things about being part of a team, is that if I do an evaluation, the district knows that once the child receives their equipment, and we've been working on training with the school staff and the family, that they will sort of move into what they call an ongoing category. So I'm kind of with them as they keep going, and the occupational therapist and speech pathologist as well. So it's not like I'm going to be the sole trainer, but I'm going to be the person that they can keep calling back in to take a look at what's happening, and whether that's modifying for growth, or whether their needs for switches have changed, or whatever that would be. We get to kind of hang around with them and stay sometimes for many years. So we have a pretty large library of stuff at the moment, 5 power chairs, including all the electronics that we need, joysticks and head arrays, lots of different types of switches, both wired and wireless. We have some fiber optics, a piezoelectric. I won't read them all to you, but it's a pretty long list of things, and we've accumulated stuff over the years. Every year I kind of look to see what we've got, what seems to be current, what seems to be a need, and then we talk about it with our district, and everybody sort of puts their wish list together. I talk to all of the therapists in my department to try to make sure that we haven't missed anything that they're thinking of, and then we go on. We also have a lot of educational software. We want to make sure that when we make a suggestion to the districts for them to purchase, that we've already trialed it and kind of have a sense from their staff of what's working, because we're not going to be the ones that are the long-term daily users of this equipment, and we know that. So if software is a great idea but doesn't work for the kid, or a 2-switch setup's not working for the kid because the staff's not feeling comfortable enough with it, or it really just isn't working, we need to make sure that before we ask them to purchase something, we've tried it and that the kid has. We're in an urban area, which is a great thing. So we have a lot of local wheelchair supplier representatives. We have manufacturer reps in our area from many of the companies, and we contact them on a regular basis. Sometimes I think they get tired of me, but that's okay. We have also local and regional representatives from the seat support companies, and we rely on them. We have national manufacturers. If not in our area, we contact them, and one of the benefits of conferences like this is just to be able to go around, introduce yourself, get a chance to see the stuff, and this, for anyone who hasn't taken advantage of that, I would suggest that you do, because there's always a demo or a loaner available for something, and even if you have to wait a little bit, you can get it. We work with the manufacturers and suppliers of the AUGCOM devices. They unfortunately do not have the same number of units available, so it's sometimes more limited. But in our area, we rely on Infinitec, which is a branch of United Cerebral Palsy, and they do a lending library. The Illinois Assistive Technology Project is another group through whom we can get stuff. So typically, we can get a device. And then we have some lift-equipped vehicles so that we can move things around as needed. I like to do long trials because I like to make sure that we're not making a mistake on anything relating to power. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 of the students who are using dual or multiple controls. The first is a 14-year-old, was a 14-year-old girl when we looked at her new system, female with schizoencephaly, which is somewhat similar to CP, but essentially it's like areas of the brain are not fully there. So sort of Swiss cheesy, very competent young woman. She does not have verbal speech that's intelligible to too many people, but she uses a computer and a power chair. When she first came to us, she was using a secondary joystick, a Penny and Giles joystick, to operate her computer, and it was strictly a dedicated device for which she liked to just go item by item by item, item by item by item. She just liked to hear it talk. She really didn't have any interest in it. But when she entered first grade and we started to try to get a little bit more academically out of her, we gave her got her a Tash mouse mover so that she could use her joystick control, and we got her a MacBook, and it had some things that were very cool. We put a lot of communication stuff on there that made it much easier, and the internet, and she learned to shop. And that was all she needed to learn how to use the computer well. And then she said to me, you know, I can't stop in the hall fast enough to say hi to my friends. So we took a step-by-step communicator, and she chose 10 messages that she wanted to have, just quickie messages, and we Velcroed it to her abductor so that she could move her hand off her joystick and hit the switch, and it would just say, every time someone said, hey, Robin, she had a different, you know, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Whatever they, you know, so she could quickly talk to people. So some of that stuff we never put on the computer. So after 7 years of driving, what we learned when she was getting ready for high school was that she wasn't making it down the hall. And I found out that the staff was driving her a great deal of the time because as her tone increased during the course of the day, she was just too tired to do it. So, you know, here she is sitting in her chair, and somebody's driving it down the hall for her. And I kept saying, she can do it. We gotta look at some other solutions here. So in our MAT eval, you can see she has a few issues posturally, but when she's sitting and can get that really wide abduction, all of a sudden her pelvis levels. She has a dislocated hip on the left, but her pelvis levels pretty nicely, and she does straighten. As we bring her right leg in, we get more tone, and we also get more of the curvature. Unfortunately, for a girl with 12-inch pelvis to sit in an 18-wide chair was a little big. So we played around with lots of different things. We looked at her goals and the goals from her family and what the educational team was looking at. And for Robin, the big thing was that she wanted to make it through the day. She wanted to drive her chair. She wanted to go to high school with a chair that she could get around, and she did not want to have people doing it for her. And she wanted to keep all of her computer skills, so we knew we would be integrating the system again. She wanted to be comfortable because her left hip was bothering her a lot. She wanted to be able to turn the chair on and off and be able to tilt the chair by herself. And unfortunately, her range of motion is about 4 by 6. So we knew that she was no longer going to be reaching to hit the step-by-step in a larger chair. So we knew we were going to have to make some changes on her system. And we also figured it was time to look at some alternative controls. So we went with the Q6 Edge with the enhanced electronics. We did custom molded seating, and we gave her the QLogic standalone joystick because it was so little and so easy for her to use, and then a switch head array. So she used she has her display where she can see it, and she uses her joystick for the computer. She uses it when she wants to drive, and she can go to the head array when she doesn't want to use her joystick, and she could get into tilt, which was huge for her. And I just have listed some of the things. We went with the Gatlin mount because that really works nicely to get everything right within that little range of motion that she has, and a power tilt on the chair. She didn't want anything else, and truly, if you put her in recline, you see so much of that asymmetry coming into place. Even if we weren't doing molded seating, she wouldn't have been comfortable. And then the last item we needed to get was a mount that would work on the chair. So this is the custom molded seat. We did bring her in a little bit more. She's amazing in that over time, even though she has this functional scoliosis, it can straighten out, and they have opted not to do surgery. They're not to stabilize it at this point in time. So it took us, I'll just jump to the bottom for a second, the whole process from the decisions, once all the decisions were made, we took us about 2 months once the letter was submitted. But in the letter, we went through all the physical assessment that we had done and our knowledge of her over the course of the years, listing, what she'd used, what that progression was. We did put in a lot of data from the trial, what her medical history was. We justified her need for the chair, but then each item, again, we went through and explained why they related to the diagnosis and to what her needs were. We took pictures of her, you've seen a few of them, and included them in there. We had data for how she used her joystick on the computer, how she used her joystick for driving, and how she used the head array. And the big the big difference for the head array was that in the high school environment, she would be traveling long hauls, somewhat akin to getting around the Gaylord, and needing to be able to keep going, and not have to leave one class early to get to the next class. And, if you're familiar with high schools of any kind, you got elevators, you just have to take travel into consideration. So we were pretty lucky. She has 2 forms of insurance. Her dad had been in the military, so she has some government coverage, which always works well for her in terms of her equipment. So within 3.5 months, we had everything for her. And she looks pretty good in the chair, and she's still driving it. We have to tweak things maybe every 6 months or so, but that's the nice thing about the way my role works. I get a chance to keep going back, and I've known her since she was 3, so it's kind of fun to keep in contact. Second student, 21-year-old, he was going to be aging out of the system. He has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy with, of course, a progressive loss of strength, range, and active movement. He was an excellent driver, and one of his big goals was not to lose any of it. He was a joystick driver. He used tilt and recline, which the wheelchair supplier and I had to sort of talk him into originally because he thought tilt was all one ever needed. But once we had him trial tilt, recline, and leg elevation, he realized, you can do all kinds of different things with this stuff. And it kind of changed his perspective on powered mobility in general. And it kept him functional for a much longer time. He figured out little tricks like if you tilt to a certain point and you then recline to a certain point, you can sort of get your hand up and get your glasses back up, and you don't have to ask somebody to do it for you. And he also was an avid gamer, and he used his computer a lot for graphic design. So he originally was using an on-screen keyboard, and he's huge guy on the net. He's really close with a lot of kids in the MDA Association. So this was, one of his, main, between that and his phone, he was in contact with his friends all the time. And then as time went on, even though he could access everything on his joystick, he could no longer put his hand on the joystick, but everything was there. That was kind of his world. So when we went to look at what would be the last chair that I would help him with, these were the goals that he gave me. He needed to be independent in his own positioning because he was having a lot of pain. He wanted to be able to keep control of everything that he had. And unfortunately, the new joystick that Quantum had come out with was designed differently, and he was no longer able to reach everything on the joystick itself. And he still wanted to be able to turn the chair on and off and to be able to switch his modes. He threw out the question of could he get a stander on his chair, so that was another thing we needed to explore. And like our other student, he wanted to be able to drive all day and not fatigue. So he had been in the quantum family for a long time. He wanted the quantum 6000Z for speed more than anything else, and he's a big guy, so putting him in a chair that was of a lower class or that didn't have the beefiness was not going to work for him. He did not like front-wheel drive, so that took that off the table pretty much. So the decisions were for the EX joystick and, of course, all the electronics that we needed. And then we added the switch-it drive control, for which we knew he would be able to manage because he was such an avid gamer. We went with the Motion Concepts TRX Ultra Low seat because it had all the functions he needed, and he was most comfortable with the tilt and recline system on that. And once he had it on his prior chair, there was no going away from it. We looked at all the standing options that were available on the market, and he wasn't comfortable in them. He was very posturally insecure, as anyone his age would be, but size was one of the issues. He had also had spinal stabilization, so his trunk moved as a unit, and we just couldn't get him in a position where he was comfortable, whether he went from supine to stand or came up slowly through the other systems. So he opted, even though it was what he really, really wanted, he opted not to have it. So for this young man's case, we again wrote the detailed letter of medical necessity, going through everything, and his history with the equipment. We included all the data for the ways he used his chair and the various aspects of what he was going to need. We had a little more trouble with him. We got approval in 3 months, so it wasn't terrible. We had one denial, and he got his chair about 5.5 months after the process because there were a lot of components to the chair. The last student, and the one that kind of pushed me to think about presenting today, was a 19-year-old male who had been an athlete, and he was a high school senior. On the day of his homecoming, he sustained a brainstem stroke. He had an aneurysm in the brainstem, and during the repair, it broke. And so he has a quadriplegia now with locked-in syndrome and a mild TBI. He has very limited movements. Primarily, he raises his left eye and eyebrow, and he has minimal flexion of the middle finger on his right hand. Occasionally, he has bicep flexion, but when we put the splint on so that he can use his switch, he can't lift his arm. Occasionally, we see him shrug his shoulder a little bit, but we don't even know whether that's an active movement or not an active movement because he doesn't always know what's happening. So sometimes he'll tell me he thinks it is, but he's not sure. He lacks a lot of proprioception. So he will not know if his foot fell off the foot plate, and then he'll be able to tell me that he has pain. So, it's a real scattered sense of what he has. And he does have some sensation. So that, for better or worse, depending on the situation, the pain can be a problem. And what he has in terms of strength is very limited. He does not have any active head control or trunk control. So obviously a head array was going to be out of the question. He occasionally will move his head to one side, but then he can't move it back. And sometimes it just rolls on the headrest, and sometimes he actively is moving it. But unfortunately, we were never able to tap into that as a movement. So when he came to us, he was a manual wheelchair user with dependent propulsion. He had a trach and full body cough that could just about get him out of the chair. And this is Patrick and his friends. His friends have stayed close and been a big part of his life. So he came to us about 14 months after his rehab in an Invacare Solara. He had a Dynavox VMAX with eye gaze and one switch and that was on a splint for his right hand. And his alternative means of communication was a color-coded spell board. So you kind of go through letter by letter for him. And of course, the first thing he said to me is, "I want to drive." I don't blame him. So this is what his communication equipment looked like. I'm sure you've all seen the Dynavox. The color-coded spell board works that when he has something he wants to say, if he didn't have the Dynavox up, he would move his eye up and down to indicate that he had a message, and you would just go down the rows by color, and if you said red and he raised his eyebrow, then you would go A, B, C, until he selected the letter. So it's a letter by letter communication, and then he looks down when he's done with the word, and he just holds his eye down there. He's very fast with this method of communication, but of course it's a limited means of communicating because, you know, how many people in the world are going to be able to do this with him? His friends have learned it, and he can Skype with his friends, and it works fairly well. But again, it's a limited means of communication. So our challenges were big. He had the two reliable movements that we knew we were going to be able to capitalize on. However, the eye was how he used his eye for so much communication. We had to be really careful about considering that. He had sporadic control of other digits on his hand, so we thought maybe we would be able to capitalize on some of that. We'll take a look at him. His strength was in such low muscle grades that we were concerned about what that was going to mean. He had very limited endurance, and that cough would literally, hands go flying off the armrest, head came flying out of the headrest, legs, you know, way up in the air. So a lot of repositioning would go on during the course of the day. He was 19, so, you know, accepting the fact that this disability that had occurred to him was extremely difficult. When we were working with him on altering some of the keyboards, he would make comments like, you know, it's okay, this is fine, because when I finish school, I'm going to be on a regular keyboard, and I'm going to be walking out the door. I'm getting my diploma on my feet. So, you know, there were a lot of issues that he had to contend with, and so did his family. And then the probably biggest issue, aside from his own understanding and acceptance, was the fact that something happened to this kid. And so everyone they knew, including the family, was on the internet. Everybody was researching everything and coming up with, you know, all these fabulous ideas, despite the fact that he had spent 14 months in inpatient and outpatient through the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which is a phenomenal facility, and many things had been looked at and discussed. But through the entire process of our wheelchair eval, we were hit with research and information on a regular basis that someone had found for them, and equipment kept showing up. So we were having to deal with a lot of things, and you don't want to say no. You know, I didn't want him to think that we weren't listening to his opinion or to his family's opinions or to their needs. It had to be heard, but it did delay the process dramatically. So I would just say the plan evolved over time. We assessed everything, both on the mat and in the stander, in the wheelchair, trying to look at everything that he had and how reliable it was. We took inventory of everything we had. We researched everything we could come up with ourselves, just to follow up with everything, and to make sure, to honestly make sure that we weren't jumping the gun and coming up with something that wasn't going to work for him long term, or that we came up with something that, you know, he wasn't necessarily going to be able to use. So we learned everything we could about what he had, and where the drawbacks would be, what the benefits were. I highlighted the fact that we contacted manufacturers because this was going to be a lengthy process, and we have great relations with the suppliers in our area. We weren't trying to circumnavigate them, but we knew they were not going to have the time, and they were going to go to the manufacturers anyway. So I just called in a favor from every single person I could think of. You know, I need to trial this. Can you get me that? What would you do? And so did the speech path and the OT. We just, you know, kept trying to come up with anything possible. So on the handout that I put out in hard copy, I also added the websites for where you can get these, but these are the methods of, you know, that we found for people with limited access, and so I just wanted to put them all together so that you'd have it. We won't go through each and every one of them. I starred the ones that are things that we trialed with the student over time, and you know, kind of wanted to give you what the manufacturers say in terms of what strength it would take, whether there's a limit to how much excursion a switch might need, and just what we came away with, what grade of strength you might need to have. We did trial some things that we thought were going to be a little bit too difficult for him to do, either because he asked for them or because when we would see this movement, we would think, well, you know, let's not just ignore it. Maybe we could give him something, you know, as an alternate or a stop switch or, you know, a quick message to someone, just trying to make sure that we were looking at everything that was out there. And again, lots of different things on here. Things that we thought would be most likely to be used were the AbleNet microlight, which he came with. He also had the piezoelectric, which he had on hypothenar eminence. Unfortunately, he overactivated it a lot. So, and two-switch scanning wasn't very fast for him by comparison to his eye gaze. So we pretty much decided that we wouldn't use the piezoelectric for communication. He would continue to use his eye gaze and the single switch for making a selection. But we kept it in the background thinking that we might need it as another switch site. So on that page, those were the items that we used the most. He occasionally was able to use the AbleNet Leaf and was thinking that he would want that for just getting someone's attention or calling for help, because he originally was thinking that he wouldn't want people around him all the time, so this would be a way for him to communicate with someone in the other room and call for help. We tried spec switches in several different areas, and we have the Words Plus infrared sound and touch, which we mounted on glasses to try to capitalize on the eye movement. It actually worked pretty well as a second sight, but he decided that since he uses his eye so much for communication, that he really didn't want to use that for anything else. And so we decided not to use it, and we looked at it on a couple of other sites just to make sure, because we could use it in the infrared mode, and just to make sure that we were, you know, covering that base to see. He occasionally could move his finger out to the side, his fifth digit, and so that was one area we did. We looked at the mercury tip switch, thinking that it might lead us to the Magitech systems, the tilt sensor systems. Unfortunately, he didn't have any movement that we could reliably use as a tilt. So I think the Magitech is much more sensitive, and I wish that that would be one thing that I wish we had been able to look at a little more carefully. We then looked at the Micro Mini joystick from ASL and the Switch Micropilot. He wanted a more traditional joystick, so we looked at some more traditional ones, including the micro extremity. Was not able to activate any of those. We looked at mini touchpads because we have one that's very sensitive that you could use just like the touchpad on your computer, and we thought since he would just sit there and move his finger a lot of times, even when he wasn't working, well, you know, maybe we can get, because wherever you land, you don't have to move very far, and we hoped maybe we could get some lateral movement there. And we looked at the ROLLTALK. Of other items on here, I've mentioned it already, but the Magitech tilt sensor was something that we considered. I have included on here the brain-machine interface and the tongue-control joystick, because these are methodologies that are either, there's pretty much still experimental, but they're coming, and they're things that I think one would look at if you were trying to figure out what else is out there. So these were I listed out for you on the next chart, what we used and what worked or didn't work. And our most consistent was the AbleNet microlight, which he came with and continues to use. And then the last item on the second page is the ROLLTALK with eye gaze. So the timeline was that he had his aneurysm in 2010. A little over a year later, we met him as he was leaving rehab, and he came to us about a month and a half after that. We got him in a power chair pretty much the end of the first month he was with us, and we tried the PERMOBIL C400 with the switch at micro pilot joystick. And again, this was through manufacturers. I didn't involve any of the reps from the suppliers at that point in time, just because we didn't know how long anything was going to take us. And it took a lot of tweaking to get his positioning and then also getting his hand in a place that was functional for him. So then we wanted to look at a mid-wheel drive, and we moved him into the TDX from Invacare because it was available and in our area, and the rep was great, and we were able to get the ASL Micro Mini joystick on there within a short period of time, and we did 2 trials for that. And Patrick determined he felt most comfortable in a front-wheel drive. He just felt that where he was in space and the limited postural control he had, that gave him the best sense of stability. We knew he needed tilt, recline, leg elevation, and then in 2012 September, he said, you know, I love to be in my stander. I want to be in there at least 2 hours a day. But he stood in the easy stand stander sort of like this. So, you know, as a PT, you're thinking, okay, that's not going to work. So we started looking at standing options. Originally, they did not want standing as part of the chair. And we looked at the PERMOBIL C500 VS and the Invacare FDX, 2 chairs that were available to us in the area and with dramatically different sit-to-stand features. And we wanted to know how he best could come to stand physiologically. And what we determined was that he needed to come up through at least partial supine, far enough that we weren't sending him into all kinds of reflex activity or making him just too posturally insecure. And if you think about it, without head control, coming up to stand is hugely challenging. And he, you know, he didn't want his head strapped down during that process. So then things got complicated because we had just made what we thought were some kind of good decisions, that we would mount that microlight on a switch, on a splint that would be always with him, and that when his hand flew, the switch would go with him and he would be able to come back to neutral. We thought we had a second switch site that was going to be his, you know, that was going to turn the chair off automatically. We thought we were doing good. And he was getting pretty excited about the whole thing. And then I went to Closing the Gap, which is an educational conference all about assistive technology, you know, thinking in terms of what kids will use in school. And Lisa Rotelli and Karen Kangas were there, and I went to one of their sessions, and I saw the ROLLTAK Nova. And it's from a company called Abilia in Norway, but it's represented by ASL in the United States. It has a Windows-based computer with full computer capabilities, and it interfaces with power wheelchairs for driving and seat functions. And so although eye gaze was a strength we knew Patrick had, we never connected the fact that there might be something out there that would allow us to use that strength and allow him to drive. So basic information about the ROLLTAK is that it kind of looks like an Android phone to me, or a Surface computer. This is your main menu. When you turn on the machine, it will automatically go to this unless you set it differently. And you can see all the icons up there that allow you the different features that you would want to have. You can set that screen up differently, so if you do not care to have languages on the screen, you just take that off the menu. If you don't want to be able to, you say you're not going to use it as a remote control, you could take that off. Anything that you want or don't want on there, you can select, and at the bottom, you can select shortcuts and decide what it is that you might want to have in either more than one space, or might be those things that are easiest for you to access. This is what the drive screen looks like. So it's pretty simple in terms of its overall layout. You'll see it on here if you come up and take a look at it. It's configured a little bit differently. The arrows are a little further down. But key features that I like on this are that you can turn your chair on and off. You can go to scan if you're exhausted and you don't want to have to do as much eye gaze selection on your own. You can program in the sentences that are on the right that would be sentences for things that you might need typically when you're driving. Excuse me, could you please get out of my way? Could you open the elevator door? Anything that you would like to see on there. I need some help. his father said he's going to use a few obscenities. He's not going to say please. We're going to have to redo those. But then, and we did. But the nice thing is that it's all there, so you're not having to get off your drive page to go to your communication page to pull up a message, and the guy's halfway down the hall already, and you really wanted him to pick up what you dropped. So it's a very easy to use and easy to understand system. The seat function page looks like this. So you select which function it is that you want. When you get to that function, it'll have that picture and an A and a B. So if you want to tilt, you'll go to A, and it'll tilt you. If you stop, you go back to A, it'll tilt you some more. If you want to come back up, you hit B, and you come back up as far as you want. So it's really simple to operate system. And this is, the 3 areas in which you can set up communication. So body is something that, of course, if you're needing this system, you need to talk about your body. So that's in there, but you can alter the messages on there. And it usually is something you would want on your main page because you can quickly convey a message. Keyboard can be the QWERTY keyboard, the alphabetic, or it can be a frequency of use keyboard. And in my opinion, you probably could add other keyboards that are available for download. And this is the bottom screen is sentences. So in your drive screen, this is where you would set up your sentences. It gives you a really nice feature if you know you're going to be like making a presentation. You could put your presentation in a document and then pull it up, but then you could have some things that you might want to say that you don't want to have to type out once you're finished with it. We used it for him when he was going for an interview so that he came up with questions to ask at the admissions office, and then that led to other questions, but he really wanted to go in with all his questions intact so that all he had to do was ask a question, and then he had another question that would lead from that depending on how it was answered. So it gave him the opportunity to kind of convey that he had something to say rather than having to spell it out letter by letter. And then when needed, he could go back to the communication page quickly and give a response, or he could use his eye gaze method. All of these can be done with your joystick, with a keyboard and a mouse. You can do it with a touch screen, and you can do it with eye gaze. So this is the reason that it became very exciting to us, because we figured this is a technology that we know right now he's going to use with eye gaze. In my heart, I know he will always use it with eye gaze. But this gave him something to think about in terms of, if I get better with a joystick, I can do this same system with a joystick. So that was a possibility that made it a little more appealing to him, as well as being able to use the eye gaze. So we trialed this on December 19th. He's never seen this before. He just was placed in the chair, and I have to turn off the sound because you don't want to hear his mother talk about the camera instead of the fact that he's driving the chair. We didn't tell them why they were coming. We just said we had another driving method we wanted to show them, because I knew if I told them it would be it would open the door to some questions. Talk about truth in advertising, you know. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that it was on there. So what he's doing is looking at the arrow for the direction he wants to go, and then he activates the switch. He doesn't need to keep looking at the arrow, although when you first get in the chair, that's your tendency. But he came right up to me, and I didn't budge. I had told him, I'm going to stay in place and see if you can turn when you get to me. Unfortunately, I didn't get, I'm not a great photographer, but I didn't get a good picture of everything. But you can see it's mounted high because that's where his Dynavox was mounted at the time. So we were trying to simulate everything as close as possible. But that's a kid who he's never seen the device, had no idea, but he understood it. It was pretty simple to use. So then we did a couple of investigations of other things. We trialed the standards in the interim, and we got the ROLLTALK back in April. Unfortunately, between December and April, his Dynavox broke, and so he wasn't using his eye gaze as consistently. So we trialed it about a week earlier. We trialed the ROLLTALK about a week earlier to this video, and he wasn't able to do much of anything. And we were all thinking, okay, well, that was a bad idea. But I made him do eye exercises all week, and we put a Toby up in front of him, and it wasn't ideal, but we made him work at it. And so then we brought in a wheelchair supplier this time, as well as the manufacturer, and decided that we were going to give this a shot. Did it start? Oh, please. Oh. Yeah, let me see. Oh, I took it off my desktop. You know what? I took it off my desktop. Let me try this again. I'm sorry? I don't think, well, you mean just on the slide? I'll try it. It was working perfectly last night. It always is the way, right? I don't think it's going to. It encountered a problem. Shoot. No, that's not going to help me. Don't look at the screen. You don't want anybody dizzy. Well, this is disappointing. Let me just, yeah. Well, I didn't want to slow you guys down. Anyway, the fact is I wasn't going to play the whole thing, but there's 6 minutes of him driving. And he's like going around. It's a fairly large conference room, tables and chairs. The ROLLTALK box was on the floor. People kept, he'd be driving towards him and they'd like get up and he'd just go the other way. He wasn't planning to knock him down. It's pretty funny because you see, everybody's sort of moving out of his way, but he's not hitting anything. He's just got that little half smile going, that I'm in control here, you guys. So it was a very cool thing to see. And it was nice because the supplier and the manufacturer bought into it right away then. Yeah, this guy can do it. So then we had to make our decisions. We looked at what he had, everything that it could do for him in terms of all of his OGCOM usage and his computer usage. We didn't want to take anything away from him by giving him a device that wasn't going to work. We'd been exploring this stuff all along, but we had to be able to document all that. And service was a big issue, and I have to tell you that service was a non-issue once we actually got the device because ASL supported us, and in Norway, someone emailed us immediately immediately the next morning, but we always got answers. And then we needed to know, we were going to have to define how he was going to use all this equipment. And our questions were, do we go with the ROLLTAK, do we go with the micro mini joystick, or do we go with both? And our final decision was we were going to go with both, for the very reason that we hoped he would be able to use the mini joystick more consistently with time. We also knew that the ROLLTAK would be difficult to use outside. He wears very dark glasses when he's outside because he has extreme light sensitivity. So even if we could shade the screen, I don't think the eye gaze would be able to pick up his eyes. He chose the PERMOBIL C500 VS. We got all the seating features that he needed. Obviously, you know, to make sure that we were taking consideration of all of his postural needs and skin needs. We got the ROLLTAK Nova. We got the we were requesting the ASL Micro Mini as well, and all the mounts that he was going to need. So we went through all of the documentation that we were going to need to do. I did it differently than I typically would do it. In the state of Illinois, there's a long form that's used for Medicaid, and it's 12 or 13 pages. So we knew we were going to have to submit that, but I wanted to tell his story and really paint a picture of who he was. So I also submitted a relatively long document that was a timeline, so that the reader would be able to understand what we thought of, what we considered, what we trialed, what worked, what didn't work, and why we came to the decisions that we came to, and relating everything back to what that diagnosis was and what we felt his potential was. We included the video clips. They actually worked. Photos, web links also to Abilia's website, because they have some videos on there that are amazing, and I think that if you're looking at this as a feature for someone, I think you would want to look at that, because I think they speak quite clearly. There's a man who's 10 years post with ALS, and he's on a vent, and he's a physician still working, describes what a change it's made in his life. We presented the data from our trials and some research citations as well. I've included on here, I can't click on it because we don't have internet, but this Illinois.gov website has the IDPA form for the state of Illinois. I think it's a great form in that if you're not familiar with doing a wheelchair evaluation, you're working with a therapist who's not that familiar with doing them, it gives you pictorial, and it's item by item, and it helps you essentially are checking off why you want this seat cushion, why you want this back support, why you want this mobility base, and it asks the question why a lower class will not work for this person. So it's making you think and putting in the information. And in our state, I think it helps the reader on the other end get more clarity and also a little more consistency between what people write. So we submitted everything in August, we got approval in October, and we got delivery in December. So a relatively short period of time. And then we followed up with him all the way along to December of 2014. There were a lot of little issues and big issues that came up in terms of pretty much everything you could think of. Some problems with the chair, stability on the bus, problems with getting the mount exactly where we needed it, so that he could access it from different positions. So unfortunately, because he wanted to be able to tilt and recline, we couldn't mount from the seat pan. We had to mount from the back support. So, things we knew were coming, but took a while for us to figure out. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so we're going ahead very quickly. So we've transitioned him to University of Illinois at Chicago to the Assistive Technology Unit for his adult services. Very quickly, ASL is going to have the ROLLTAK. It's up here now, but it's going to be on the chair for the remainder of the day, so I would encourage you to take a look at it. It has multiple benefits. Anything you can do on your smartphone, tablet, or Android device, you can do on this. It has that full continuum of ways to access. So if you think about a user who's going to fatigue or whose prognosis is going to change, it's there. I included this because this was something that we used as a comparison of different driving techniques and the pluses and minuses, just so that, you know, if you're going from a high-end joystick to a micro mini of one sort or another, or the ROLLTALK, like what would be the features to help you with it. And then things that I think you need to consider, obviously access sites, strength, range of motion, what are the switch requirements, which is why I did that chart for you, and things that I would definitely be looking at are those ultralight switches, ultralight joysticks, the proximity switches, the infrareds. I would look at the Magitech sensors, and I would definitely look at the ROLLTALK as a means of access, and consider dual access. I think it's something that more and more of our users need, especially as they age with disabilities. In the documentation, I would include every piece of positive information that you can, because you want to build from strength, that this is what this person is able to do with this equipment, and this is what they can't do without it. And then just last bullet point would say, presume that the person reading this letter does not understand the person you're talking about. They don't understand the diagnosis. They don't understand the equipment. And they certainly don't understand why you need, you know, adjustable height armrests. You have to tell them that it's going to provide upper body support. I mean, literally every item needs to keep going back to what the diagnosis is and why that makes a difference for them, and what will happen if you don't give them that. So I apologize for running a little longer than I had planned. Please come up and try the ROLLTALK if you'd like. It's all set up to go. It's very simple to operate, and if you don't get a chance to do it today, this morning I was going to bring it out in the hall, and while they set up for the next session, it'll be at the ASL booth. Are there any questions? Yes? Any muscle you're looking at. The manual muscle test would be any muscle you're looking at. So, you know, if you're looking at a shoulder shrug, can he do a shoulder shrug all the time? Or can he just do a shoulder shrug when he's in a t-shirt, you know? I mean, I think that's important information. If you're talking about someone that has extremely limited movement or extremely low strength, you would want to make sure that what you were thinking was going to work in multiple environments and pretty much throughout the day, which is why we had to abandon the idea of his being able to raise his hand, because once we put the splint on, he no longer had that ability, you know. So, anything else? Yes? He stands multiple times during the day. When he was using the Easy Stand, we used to suggest no more than an hour because of his posture. Because he couldn't really tell what he looked like in it, and he didn't really care. It was just that he was on his feet and he was going to stand and walk. You know, so he would usually stand about twice a day, but now he still stands a lot. He's in a much better position. He doesn't come fully upright. We keep the chair tilted back a little bit, because if he does cough, he rolls onto his front casters and loses his head control. But, you know, I would say he probably still stands at least 2 hours a day when he's using it, just breaking it up. Anything else? Yeah. I'm sorry? David, has the vendor been paid? Yes. Yes. So I think it was because we spent a lot of time, and we operated from the position that they're not going to understand what this means. So we really have to paint a picture with as much information as possible about him. And I think that's why we've had a lot of the success we've had. And I have to say that it was my 9 years at the Assistive Technology Unit that really helped me understand that, because we had someone from Medicare come and talk to us about the documentation. We had been pretty successful, but she really laid it on the line. She was a former Medicare reader and said, assume they're going to edit to deny. So what are you going to say next? And put that in the original letter. And I would say that that has really worked well. We embedded a lot of their terminology in our reports so that we could make sure that we weren't missing a point. And it's just, overall, time-wise, it's faster to put it in the letter originally, if you can at all do that. So, and I think the trials, anything that you can say you've tried and been able to explain why it worked, and you know, if you're coming from a position of strength about what this person's strengths are, you want to build on that, because I ultimately do believe they want us to get the equipment that people will be successful with. Why get them a chair they're not going to be able to use? You know, so I think it's incumbent upon us to really make sure that this is that enabling device that is going to work for them. And, you know, I'd rather fight the fight and get the stuff that people need. And I think it's what will make the next chair easier, you know, for somebody else to get. So the chair is here. Please come up if you'd like to take a look at it closer. And again, we'll make it available. But I would have to say that I've learned more in the last 2 years about what you can and can't do with a chair, and have been just more and more excited. I used to think I was one of those people that would sit and I wouldn't go to anything that had anything to do with robotics, because I would think, oh, come on, I want to know what's working right now. And I still want to know what's working right now, but I am more charged by the new stuff. And I have to say that I would like to challenge our companies in the United States to do this. I would love to see, you know, just a simple iPad or Android-type tablet be able to do what this is able to do. And I know that some of the small devices will never be able to, you know, support enough electronics, but I think it's where we should be going, because eye gaze is such a big deal right now. I can tell you in the schools it's huge, because we're finding more and more kids can do it, and they can do it faster, and it's direct select instead of scanning. So, you know, that's why they can do it so much faster.